In 1849, there were 3 convicts that escaped jail in a stolen dugout canoe. They crashed their boat on some large rocks in the middle of the ocean. The men were stranded on this large rock with no food, water, or shelter. They died of hunger and thirst. Eventually, birds ate the flesh from their dead bodies. When they were discovered, nothing remained but 3 skeletons. Eventually, a lighthouse was built on this rock to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. The island was named 3 Skeleton Key after the convicts. The lighthouse was 20 miles off the coast of Guiana. Some people believed the island was cursed. Some said on dark nights you could see skeletons dancing in the moonlight. By 1900, the lighthouse was up and running. It was manned by 3 workers, George, Ichua, and Legleo. Their job was to light the house every night to warn passing ships of dangerous rocks. Every night, the men turned on the light to warn ships of the dangerous rocks. During the day, they filled out reports and slept. The pay was good, and every 3 months, one man would get a 4-week vacation. It was a fairly easy job, but left little room for a social life. One night, the men noticed a large 3-mast ship sailing toward the island. It did not respond to the light. For hours, it floated around them. The men deduced that the ship must have been abandoned. The men were in no danger. The wooden boat would crash on the many rocks around the lighthouse. The concrete and steel lighthouse would not be harmed. However, it would be heartbreaking to see a perfectly fine ship destroy itself. But why was she abandoned? She didn't appear to have been on fire or taking in water. As the sun came up and the ship came closer, the men, with their binoculars, saw why she was abandoned. The rats. Every inch of the ship was covered in rats. Not ordinary rats, these were sea rats. Vicious, cunning, man-eating sea rats that would eat food on ships, and when the food was gone, would turn on the crew. The men had just enough time to close and lock all of the windows before the boat crashed. In no time, the rats swarmed all over the lighthouse, looking for food. The men were trapped inside the lighthouse, and the supply boat was not scheduled to come for another 3 weeks. Fortunately, the men had a month's worth of food, and the rats could not eat through concrete and glass. The first night, the men could not sleep, worrying that the rats would get in. The second day, the men tried to pass the time by counting the rats, even naming them, but there were too many, and they moved incessantly. By the third day, the men were going crazy. However, every night they lit the lighthouse to warn passing ships. It was their sworn duty. It was on the 4th day that Legleo noticed one of the windows sagging inward. The rats were chewing through the wooden frames. The men covered the windows with sheet metal. By the 7th day, the men decided not to light the lighthouse that night, knowing that they were risking innocent lives. They were hoping that a passing ship or someone on shore would notice the darkened lighthouse and call the Coast Guard to investigate. At 2 in the morning, The window in Ichua's room gave way. The rats poured in, swarming all over him. The men raced up the stairs in a knee-deep swarm. They locked themselves in the lantern room, stabbing the rats that got in with them. Luckily, the door was steel set in granite. There was no way the rats were getting through. However, the rats now occupied the rest of the lighthouse. The men were now covered with rat bites, with no food, water, or medical supplies. Rat bites carry infection. Ichua was now burning with fever. Legleo's mind snapped. He was screaming and talking about skeletons. George tried to remain calm and think of a way out. The darkened lighthouse had been noticed from the mainland. The next morning, a patrol boat came to investigate. Fearing that the patrol boat would think no one was alive in the lighthouse, with rats crawling in and out of the windows, George turned the lighthouse on and off several times, spelling SOS in Morse code. A few hours later, the boat returned with a fireboat and a tugboat with a huge barge in tow. The barge was filled with meat. The tug dragged the barge as close as it could to the island. Smelling the meat, every single rat fled the lighthouse and boarded the barge. The barge, with the rats, was then dragged into the middle of the ocean. The fireboat drenched the barge with gasoline. A well-placed incendiary shell from the patrol boat set her on fire. The men were taken off the island and brought to a hospital on the mainland. Legleo's mind had cracked. He had to be committed to a psychiatric facility. Ichua died within a week. A rat's bite is dangerous in that humid climate. After the lighthouse was fumigated and repairs were made, George decided to return to work at Three Skeleton Key. He said, "No reason why such an incident should keep me from finishing my service there, is there?"